My father stood up in the probate courtroom, lifted his hand like he was swearing an oath, and pointed straight at me. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, practiced, "my daughter is not mentally capable of managing an inheritance. She's unstable. She's impulsive. She needs protection from herself." I didn't flinch. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the edge of the table where the varnish had worn down into a thin, pale scar, like someone had tried to sand the truth away. Behind me, people shifted. A whisper slipped across the back row. The clerk's keyboard stopped mid-click, as if the room itself had to listen. My father's attorney, a man in a charcoal suit with a smile that never reached his eyes, nodded along like this was all painfully reasonable. Next to my father sat Marin, my stepmother, hands folded, face soft with concern, lost the kind of concern that photographs, well, they were here for my Aunt Celeste's estate. That was the official story. 8 months ago, she died quietly in her bungalow outside Seattle, and the will named me as executor and primary beneficiary of a trust meant to fund her scholarship program. 3 weeks after the funeral, my father filed to contest it. 6 weeks after that, he filed an emergency petition for guardianship over me. Not because he believed I couldn't function, because if the court declared me incompetent, he wouldn't have to beat my aunt's will. He could bypass it. "Ms. Hart," Judge Marisol Ortega said, calm as a metronome. She was in her 60s, silver hair pinned tight, glasses low on her nose. "Do you want to respond to the allegations?" Every nerve in my body wanted to speak, to correct the story, or to explain the decade of stability they were trying to erase with a few weaponized sentences. But I knew the trap. If I reacted, I'd become the proof. So I shook my head once. "No, Your Honor." The silence hit harder than any argument. Judge Ortega studied me, longer than necessary. Then she turned to my father's attorney. "Counselor," she said, folding her hands, "before we go any further, I need to ask you something." He straightened, confident. "Of course, Your Honor." Her gaze didn't waver. "Do you truly have no idea who this woman is?" For the first time, my father blinked like the script had changed, and I felt it, the smallest shift in the air, because he'd come to bury me. He didn't realize he'd brought me to a place where records, not rumors, decide what's real. The courtroom didn't breathe again, at least not normally. My father's attorney cleared his throat, trying to reset the room. "Your Honor, the petition is based on documented history. Ms. Hart has demonstrated—" "Documented," Judge Ortega repeated, "because what I'm hearing is a story, not evidence." Her eyes moved to me with something close to recognition, like she'd seen this tactic before. Provoke a reaction, then call the reaction proof. My father leaned forward. "Marisol, you know she—" "Mr. Hart," the judge cut in, "address the court." Silence snapped into place. Judge Ortega turned to the attorney. "Counselor, do you know why I asked if you knew who she is?" He hesitated. "No, Your Honor." "Then I'll make it simple." She glanced at the file. Maya Hart, certified fraud examiner, consultant for an Adult Protective Services Task Force. Oh, court-qualified witness in elder exploitation matters. My stepmother's concern flickered. My father stared at me like the ground shifted under his feet. The attorney recovered fast. "Your Honor, employment doesn't determine mental fitness." "It determines credibility," Judge Ortega said, "and it changes how seriously I take vague allegations." She leaned forward. "Ms. Hart, one narrow question. Are you currently under any guardianship, conservatorship, or legal restriction? No, I said. The judge nodded and faced my father. You want me to strip her autonomy based on what? A teenage counseling note? Hearsay? Or because your sister trusted her more than you? My father's jaw tightened. She'll ruin Celeste's legacy. She'll waste the trust. There it was, his real fear, not my health, his access. Judge Ortega didn't blink. We're proceeding the correct way. Ms. Ward, she said to my attorney, expedited discovery is granted. Produce bank statements, account authorizations, and any power of attorney tied to Celeste Hart's finances. My father's lawyer opened his mouth. The judge raised a hand. And Mr. Hart, she added, if this petition was filed in bad faith, I won't simply deny it. I will refer it. My father swallowed hard. Suddenly the courtroom wasn't a stage anymore. It was a scanner, one that turns lies into evidence. I kept my face still, but inside everything clicked, because if they were bold enough to call me incompetent in public, they were bold enough to leave fingerprints somewhere private. And tonight, when the house went quiet, I was going to open Celeste's accounts and read the truth the way it always appears, line by line. And I didn't go home after court. I went to my office, sat in the dark, and opened Celeste's accounts like they were a crime scene. The petition had already done damage. 2 emails from my firm waited in my inbox. Temporary leave, standard review, until this is resolved. No one called it what it was, a stain designed to spread. Fine, let it spread. Stains show direction. Celeste had added me as an authorized user years ago for convenience, back when her hand started shaking. I pulled every statement from the last 24 months. I exported. I sorted. I built a timeline the way I always do, because panic makes people sloppy, and sloppy makes liars lucky. At first, everything looked like Celeste. Pharmacy, groceries, utilities. Then the withdrawals appeared. Cash, not checks, not a transfer to a contractor, cash. $4,000, $6,000, $9,500. Round numbers, irregular spacing, until you stopped staring at the amounts and started staring at the dates. Celeste kept a simple calendar. Doctor, church. Murrin stopped by. Lunch with Robert. My throat tightened as I cross-checked. Every cash withdrawal landed within 72 hours of a visit from my stepmother. Murrin always played the gentle one. Soft voice, soft hands, soft lies. And my father, Robert, had stood in open court and called me unstable. My phone buzzed. A text from Robert. We can still fix this if you cooperate. I didn't answer. I made coffee and drove to Celeste's bungalow. The house still smelled like her, citrus cleaner and old paper. I moved carefully, not rummaging, just noticing. A missing folder, a drawer pushed too far back, the faint outline where a stack of envelopes used to sit. It wasn't grief that hit me then. It was the colder idea of someone rearranging a life to hide the gaps. Then I remembered the safe deposit box, Harbor State Bank, downtown. Celeste had made me a co-signer after a break-in scare years ago. The manager recognized her name and slid the key across the counter without questions. Inside the box, jewelry, a deed, a neat bundle of bonds, and a thin brown leather journal I had never seen. I opened it in the vault room. The first entries were hopeful. Then the handwriting sharpened into lists, dates, amounts, short sentences that read like warnings. One line was underlined hard enough to scar the page. Murrin brought papers, Said it was for the estate. I wasn't sure. I signed anyway. I closed the journal slowly, feeling the air change in my lungs. They weren't trying to prove I was incompetent. They were trying to keep anyone competent from looking too closely. By sunrise, the journal wasn't just a diary, it was a map. I spread everything across my desk. Celeste's calendar notes, the highlighted withdrawals, photos of the journal pages, and circled one line until the ink tore through the paper. Marin brought papers, said it was for the estate. I signed anyway. Papers, not one paper, plural. That meant there was a document somewhere that gave Marin permission to touch money without leaving her name on the withdrawal slip, a lever, a master key. So I went back to Harbor State Bank with a calm smile and a rehearsed sentence. I'm executor. I need every authorization document associated with Celeste Hart's accounts. The manager's friendliness dimmed the moment he pulled up the profile. There are additional permissions on file, he said carefully. Print them, I replied. He disappeared into a back office. When he returned, he slid a thin folder across the desk like it weighed 50 pounds. The top sheet was titled Durable Power of Attorney, grantee Marin Voss. Effective date 9 months before Celeste died. My throat tightened, not because I was shocked, but because I wasn't. The paper looked clean, official font, proper clauses, the kind of form people trust because it resembles law. I didn't look at the signature first. I looked at the notary block. Stamp, Calvin Moore. Commission number, date, a neat, satisfied little rectangle of authority. And I knew that name. Not personally, professionally. I opened my laptop and searched the state notary registry. 2 clicks. 1 result. My finger hovered on the trackpad, less than pressed. Commission expired 3 years earlier. I stared at the screen until the words stopped being words and became what they actually were. A felony, not a misunderstanding, not a family dispute, not a messy probate. Fraud, on paper, filed at a bank, used to move money. My phone buzzed. Another text from my father. We can settle this today. Sign the evaluation. Stop making it ugly. I didn't answer. I scanned the POA, then zoomed in on the notary stamp. The edges were faintly uneven, like it had been pressed by someone rushing. Someone who thought no one would ever check. I forwarded the file to Helen Ward with 1 line. This document can't be valid. The notary wasn't active. She called in under a minute. Her voice was low, tight. Maya, where did you get this? From the bank, I said. It's already on file. It's already been used. A pause. Then, don't confront them. Not yet. If they think they're winning, they'll keep moving. And when people keep moving, they leave tracks, I finished. Exactly, Helen said. Now listen carefully. We're going to let them believe you're cornered. I looked at my father's last text again, the demand wrapped in fake concern. And for the first time, I understood the real game. They didn't file guardianship because they wanted control. They filed it because they needed me distracted while they emptied what was left. So I whispered into the phone, "Okay?" Then I smiled because I finally knew what to do next. I called my father back before the sun was fully up. "I'll do the evaluation," I said, soft enough to sound defeated. "I'll cooperate. Just stop making this public." He exhaled like a man being merciful. "It's all good. Smart choice." We met that afternoon at a downtown cafe. His idea. I wore a plain sweater, no makeup, hair pulled back, tired, harmless. Helen hated the plan, but she understood it. "Say as little as possible," she warned. "Let him talk." My father sat with Marin, both of them arranged like a photo. Concerned faces, hands folded. A thick folder waited between them. Marin touched my wrist. "Honey, we're just worried about you." I stared at the folder. "What happens if I sign?" My father slid it over. "Temporary conservatorship. Until the court is satisfied, it protects the trust. It protects you." He said trust like it was love. I turned pages slowly, pretending to read. I was hunting for connections, names, accounts, anything that tied their story to their hands. A line in the middle of legal sludge caught my eye. Transfer authority includes Harbor State account ending 7714 and affiliated investment account ending 0331. Investment account? Celeste never mentioned an investment account. I let my voice thin. "If I sign, you'll drop the hearing?" My father leaned in. "We'll tell the judge you had a moment, that you needed help. You'll be fine if you stop fighting." Then, because he thought he'd won, he talked too much. He said the scholarship money would be moved somewhere safer. He said Marin had already spoken to our banker to speed things up. He promised it would all look clean by the time the judge ruled. Inside my sleeve, my phone recorded every word. "I just need one thing," I whispered, "a copy, so my therapist knows I'm being responsible." Marin hesitated. My father didn't. He unlocked his phone and pulled up an email thread, tilting the screen toward me without thinking. The subject line hit like ice. REPOA, execution plus expedited wire. The preview showed routing numbers, a sender name, and a timestamp. Today. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't stare too long. I just nodded like a woman surrendering. When I stood to leave, my father smiled. "This is the best for everyone." I stepped outside, called Helen, and said, "They're wiring it today." "I have the thread." Helen's voice sharpened. "Don't go home." Before I could ask why, my own bank alert chimed. Another withdrawal attempt, larger than all the rest. And this time, it wasn't cash. It was a wire. The alert hit my screen like a siren. Wire transfer pending. $78,000. For one heartbeat, my body tried to panic. Then Celeste's voice slid into my mind. "Steady as math. Don't argue with a transaction. Stop it." I ducked into a hotel lobby, sat behind a fake plant, and called the bank. "Are you authorizing a hold on all outgoing wires?" the fraud agent asked. "Yes," I said. "Freeze it. Fraud flag. Now." While she worked, I forwarded the cafe recording and the screenshot of that email thread to Helen. Helen called back immediately. "Where are you?" "Not home." "Good. Do you have proof they're moving funds today?" "I have the alert, and my father on tape saying it'll look clean by the time the judge rules." "That's enough for an emergency order," she said, "but I need the destination." The agent returned. "We stopped the wire. Beneficiary, Voss Consulting Group, LLC. Marin's maiden name, of course. "Get to my office," Helen said. "I'm filing ex parte to freeze every account tied to that POA." In the car, my father called. I let it ring out. A text followed. "Don't make this ugly." At Helen's office, there was no comfort, only motion. She shoved a pen into my hand. "Sign, initial, sign." Her paralegal printed the notary registry page, expired commission highlighted. Another page showed the wire beneficiary. Another showed the cash withdrawal pattern. Helen stacked it into a folder labeled Emergency. Court in 40 minutes, she said. If they realize the wire failed, they'll go louder. They'll try to provoke you. I swallowed. Let them. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Check your aunt's house. The room tilted, not from superstition, from logic. If they couldn't move money digitally, they'd go for paper. Wills, deeds, journals. Anything that could disappear and delay the case. Helen saw my face change. Show me. I handed her the screen. She didn't hesitate. Call police for a welfare check at the property. I'm calling the court clerk. If they step inside without permission, this stops being a family dispute. Outside her window, the city kept shining like nothing was wrong. But I could already picture my father's next play. If he couldn't steal the funds, he'd try to steal the proof and blame my instability when it vanished. The patrol car's lights washed Celeste's quiet street in blue and red, like the neighborhood had suddenly become a warning. I pulled in behind it, heart steady for the first time all day, not calm, just focused. The front door of Celeste's bungalow was cracked open, not kicked in, opened with a key, then left that way so it would look sloppy. "Ma'am, stay back," the officer said, stepping onto the porch. I didn't argue. I watched. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Air that had been disturbed. The living room looked ransacked. But the chaos was staged. Couch cushions tossed, drawers yanked, jewelry box overturned. The kind of mess people make when they're in a hurry to perform a crime scene. Detective Sanchez arrived 2 minutes later, notebook already open. "Anything missing you can name right now?" "Yes," I said. "A file box from the desk, a laptop, and any paper labeled estate." He glanced at me. "You're the niece?" "Executor," I corrected. In the back bedroom, the desk drawers were empty in a way that felt intentional. Someone hadn't searched. They'd collected. They took the documents that could slow a case down. Original statements, signed forms, anything with wet ink. Then I saw the frame on the nightstand. Celeste at a charity gala, smiling like she'd just gotten away with a secret. The glass was cracked, but the frame hadn't fallen. It had been opened. I slid my finger along the backing. A small rectangle of paper fluttered out. A sticky note with one line in Celeste's handwriting. "Check the tea tin." My throat tightened. Even under pressure, she'd still left breadcrumbs. In the kitchen, I found the tin on the top shelf, behind the mugs. Inside, a USB drive wrapped in wax paper and a folded bank receipt dated the same week the POA appeared. The receipt listed a notary fee, cash, paid at a shipping store near downtown. Sanchez's radio crackled. "Neighbor has doorbell footage." We walked next door. On the screen, a woman in a beige coat stepped onto Celeste's porch. Marin. Behind her, half in frame, was a man in a suit carrying a slim document box. He turned just enough for the camera to catch his face. It wasn't my father. It was the Harbor State Bank manager. My phone buzzed with a new alert. "Safe deposit box access. 9:12 a.m. Timestamp. 20 minutes ago." I looked up at Sanchez. "That box requires my key." He stared at the footage again, then at me. "Then someone just proved they're not only stealing money." He paused. "They're trying to erase the paper trail while it's still warm." And somewhere downtown, someone was opening Celeste's box without permission. We didn't waste time arguing with the footage. Detective Sanchez drove. I rode shotgun, to staring at the safe deposit box access alert like it might change if I blinked. Harbor State Bank looked the same as always. Glass doors, soft music, the smell of money pretending to be clean. The manager, Mr. Klein, stepped out as soon as we entered, already smiling like he'd been waiting for us. "Mrs. Hart," he said warmly, "I was just going to call you." Sanchez held up his badge. "We need the access log for Celeste Hart's box. Now." Klein's smile tightened. "Of course, but safe deposit access is confidential unless you have—" "I'm the executor," I cut in, "and I got an access notification 20 minutes ago. That box requires my key." Klein's eyes flickered, just a blink too long. "Sometimes the system—" "Stop," Sanchez said. Calm, flat. "Pull the log." Klein disappeared into his office. When he returned, he carried a printed sheet and a pen like he was offering routine paperwork. "Entry at 9:12, he said. "Authorized signer, Maya Hart. Signature, right here." He slid the page toward me. My name was there, but the handwriting wasn't mine. The letters leaned wrong, rushed, like someone copying from memory under pressure. My stomach dropped, not from fear, from confirmation. "That's forged," I said. Klein lifted both hands. "Ma'am, I only verify ID at the counter. If someone presented—" "Doorbell footage shows you at the property with Marin Voss," Sanchez interrupted. "So we're done pretending this is a misunderstanding." The air changed. The lobby got quieter. Even the music seemed to lower itself. Klein's face hardened for half a second, then softened again into performance. "Detective, you're making a serious accusation." "And you're about to make a serious mistake," Sanchez said, "because we're getting a warrant. And if that box is empty, you're not walking out of this building." Klein's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. "I can't allow access without proper authorization." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo I'd taken of Celeste's journal note, checked the T10, then the receipt with the notary fee. I didn't show him. I showed Sanchez. "Whatever they're trying to erase," I whispered, "it's tied to paper." Sanchez nodded once. Then we moved faster. While he stepped away to call it in, Klein leaned toward me, voice low enough to sound private. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "Some families settle things quietly." I met his eyes. "You mean criminals?" His smile vanished. An hour later, we returned with a warrant and 2 uniformed officers. Klein's hands shook as he led us to the vault. The box slid open with a metallic sigh. Inside, the deed folder was gone. The bonds were gone. The velvet jewelry pouch, gone. But in the center sat one fresh white envelope, perfectly placed, my name typed on the front. I opened it with careful fingers. Inside was a single key and a note in Marin's handwriting. "If you want the rest, come alone." The envelope felt heavier than it should have, like paper could carry a threat. "If you want the rest, come alone." That was the kind of line people wrote when they wanted you scared enough to be obedient. Helen had warned me about that exact mindset. People who think they're winning make mistakes. Marin wasn't asking for a meeting. She was trying to isolate me. As the key had a tiny tag clipped to it, Pine Ridge Storage, 217. Detective Sanchez watched me read it and shook his head. "No, I'm not going alone," I said. "I'm going quietly." He stared at me long enough to decide whether I was reckless or strategic. "Fine," he said, "but you don't improvise. You follow instructions." 10 minutes later, I was in my car with a dead phone in the glove box and a burner in my pocket. Helen's idea. The location pinged on the map like a bruise on the edge of town. Pine Ridge storage was rows of metal doors and security cameras that looked fake until you remembered they didn't need to catch everything, just enough to make people behave. Morin stood by Unit 217 wearing a beige coat, hair pinned back, hands empty, calm, polished, like she'd practiced being innocent in the mirror. "You came," she said, smiling softly. "Good. I knew you weren't stupid." I didn't answer. I held up the key. "Before you open it," Morin said, "we're going to fix this the right way." She nodded toward a clipboard on a folding chair. A single document sat on top, an agreement titled Voluntary Conservatorship Consent. My stomach turned cold. "Sign," she said. "Then you get everything back, the deed, the bonds, the journal, all of it." "And if I don't?" Her smile didn't move, but her eyes did. "Then your father files again. Another emergency petition, another hearing, another headline. Your career doesn't survive a second round." She stepped closer, voice dropping. "And the scholarship money? That disappears while you're busy proving you're fine." That word, fine, hit like a slap, because it wasn't about whether I was fine. It was about whether I was controllable. I looked past her, scanning reflections in the glossy doors. A black SUV idled at the far end of the row. My father's silhouette sat inside. Morin followed my gaze and laughed under her breath. "He didn't want to come. He hates mess." I lifted the burner phone and pressed one button, Sanchez's line. "No games," I said. Morin's smile finally cracked. "You think a cop fixes this?" She reached into her pocket and flashed her own phone. On the screen was a live video feed, someone's hands feeding papers into a shredder, slow, deliberate, and right before the paper vanished, I saw Celeste's name printed at the top. Morin tilted her head. "Last chance, Maya." I tightened my grip on the key, because suddenly, opening Unit 217 didn't feel like the danger. It felt like the distraction. So Morin kept the smile on her face, but her thumb hovered over her phone like a trigger. "Sign," she said, nodding at the conservatorship form, "or the shredder keeps eating." I let my eyes go soft, small, tired, obedient, while my brain measured the angles. The SUV at the end of the row, the security camera above the office door, the way Morin stood just slightly left of the unit latch, like she didn't want fingerprints where they mattered. "Okay," I whispered. Her shoulders loosened by half an inch. That was all I needed. I took the pen, bent over the clipboard, and wrote one word. "See attachment." Morin blinked. "What is that?" "It's what my attorney told me to write," I said, keeping my voice weak. "So the court knows I wasn't pressured?" Her jaw tightened. "Cross it out." I did, slowly. Then I added it again, darker. She stepped closer, and for a second I smelled her perfume, expensive, clean, wrong in a place like this. "You're not clever," she hissed. "You're just lucky you had a grandmother with money." I looked up at her and smiled, just a little. "And you're not careful." I lifted the burner phone and pressed a single button. No words, just an open line, a signal, the kind Sanchez promised he'd understand. Morin's eyes flashed to the phone, then to the SUV. She recovered instantly, composure snapping back into place like a mask. "Open the unit," she said. "Now." I slid the key into the lock. My hand didn't shake, not because I wasn't scared, but because fear was useless here. The door rolled up with a metallic groan. Inside was a folding table, neatly arranged like a display. Celeste's deed folder, the missing bonds, her velvet pouch of jewelry, my aunt's journal stacked like trophies. Beside them sat a small portable shredder, unplugged. No paper dust, no scraps, no mess. The video had been a loop. Marin's smile returned, sharper. See, I can be reasonable. My stomach stayed cold. Where are the originals you already destroyed? Her eyes flicked quick toward a gray lockbox in the back shelf. That was the real prize. I stepped in, pretending to reach for the journal, and caught a glimpse of something half hidden behind the lockbox. A notary stamp case? Black. Worn. The kind you don't buy by accident. Marin followed my gaze and moved fast. Don't touch. Too late. The office door buzzer in the distance shrieked, followed by footsteps pounding gravel. Sanchez's voice cut through the rows. Police! Step away from the unit! Marin's face hardened, and for the first time all day, she looked less like a concerned mother and more like what she actually was, a cornered operator. She grabbed the gray lockbox with both hands and yanked it toward her chest. Then she said almost calmly, "If he opens that box, your father goes down with me." And she clicked the lockbox open. Marin snapped the lockbox open. Inside weren't stacks of cash. It was paper, neat, categorized, meant to hurt. 3 envelopes sat on top. Heart Trust, Voss LLC, and one in block letters that tightened my throat, Maya. "You can win the money," Marin said, "or you can keep your name clean. Pick one." Detective Sanchez stepped into the unit entrance, hand near his holster. "Step away from the box." Marin didn't. She slid out a single sheet from the Maya envelope. A motion for a court-ordered evaluation, already completed, already dated, or already bearing a signature that looked like mine until you stared at it long enough to see the imitation. Wrong slant, wrong pressure. The tiny pause where my pen would never hesitate. My forged consent. "They were going to file that tonight," I said. At the far end of the row, an SUV door opened. My father, Robert, hurried toward us with his hands raised like a man arriving to save everyone from a misunderstanding. "Maya, please, this is out of control." "Sir, stay back," Sanchez warned. Robert ignored him and locked on to me. "She made me do it," he said, pointing at Marin. "I was trying to protect you." Marin's smile flashed. "Protect her? You wrote the plan." She tossed an envelope toward Sanchez. It hit the concrete and split open. Screenshots of bank portals, wire templates, and a scanned POA stamped by a notary whose commission had expired years ago. Then she lifted the last item from the bottom of the box, a USB drive wrapped in wax paper. "Here's what ends the argument," Marin said, "because it's not my story." She plugged the drive into her phone and turned the screen toward me. Celeste sat at her kitchen table, hands trembling. Robert stood behind her, palm pressed to a shoulder, too firm. Marin's voice, sweet and steady, explained where to sign. Celeste shook her head and murmured, "I don't want to." Robert leaned down and whispered something the microphone didn't catch. Celeste signed anyway. Sanchez's face hardened. "Ma'am, put the phone down." Marin's eyes never left mine. "Come after me," she whispered, "and you're admitting he did it too." She slammed the phone against the metal door, shattering the screen, and sprinted down the row. For a second, no one moved. The lockbox sat open, evidence scattered like confetti. My father stood frozen, mouth open, still holding the pose of a concerned parent, except now the camera had finally caught him from the right angle. Sanchez bolted after Marin, his boots hammering gravel. One of the uniformed officers chased with him, radio barking codes that turned the storage yard into a cage. I stayed at Unit 217 because someone had to. Evidence doesn't run, but it disappears the second you stop watching it. Robert stepped toward me, hands still raised like a man in prayer. "Maya, listen, she's insane. She's ruining everything." "Everything?" I echoed, keeping my voice flat. "Or just your access?" His eyes flicked to the open lockbox. That tiny movement said more than his entire performance. He lunged, not at me, at the envelope marked Heart Trust. His fingers closed around it like it was oxygen. "Don't," I said. He didn't stop. He tore it open, scanning pages like he was searching for one specific document, a confession hiding in plain sight. The officer nearest us stepped in, palm out. "Sir, back away." Robert froze, then forced a shaky laugh. "I'm just trying to understand what she did. She manipulated me." I watched his hands. They weren't trembling from fear. They were trembling from calculation. Sanchez's voice cracked over the radio. "She's heading for the front gate." A car engine roared. The black SUV at the far end of the row surged forward, tires spitting dust. Robert's head snapped toward it, too fast, too familiar. "Marin!" he shouted. And the word came out like instinct, not surprise. The SUV clipped a cone and shot through the exit before the gate arm could drop. A second later, Sanchez returned, breathing hard, empty-handed. His eyes tracked the fading dust trail, then cut to Robert. "Where's your driver?" Sanchez demanded. Robert blinked. What? I drove alone." Sanchez didn't argue. He looked at the open lockbox, the scattered papers, then at me. "What do we have?" I knelt and gathered the contents with care, the forged evaluation motion, the wire templates, the expired notary POA, the notary stamp case. When I lifted the stamp case, something small slid out from underneath it, a thin card, like a hotel key. It wasn't a hotel key. It was a vault access badge with Harbor State's logo and a handwritten label. Klein After Hours. Sanchez's jaw tightened. "Bank manager!" Before he could move, his radio crackled again. New urgency, new location. "Unit 3 to Sanchez. We have movement at Harbor State. Klein just left the building with a bag. Security footage shows him heading to the underground parking." Sanchez looked at Robert like he finally saw the man behind the mask. "You two weren't freelancing," he said quietly. "You were running a pipeline." Robert opened his mouth. No words came out. Sanchez turned to me. "Get in my car, right now." Because Marin had escaped with someone's help, and the bank manager was running too. The bank's underground garage smelled like oil and polished concrete, too clean for what was happening. Detective Sanchez swung the cruiser into the ramp, lights off, radio low. "That's him," he said. Ahead, a man in a navy overcoat hurried toward a silver sedan, a black duffel bag bouncing against his thigh. Mr. Klein, the friendly manager, the same face I'd seen on the neighbor's doorbell video. Sanchez cut the engine and stepped out with his badge already raised. "Calvin Klein, police!" Klein froze for half a second, just long enough to calculate, then yanked the driver's door open. Sanchez sprinted. I moved without thinking, cutting across the lane and planting myself between Klein and the exit pillar. His eyes met mine, sharp and furious now that the mask was gone. "Get out of the way," he snapped. "Tell me how you opened Celeste's box without my key," I said, loud enough for Sanchez to hear. "Tell me how you forged my signature on the access log." Klein's jaw worked. You don't understand. I was instructed. Instructed by who? Sanchez demanded, closing the distance. Klein tightened his grip on the duffel. For one wild second I thought he'd swing it like a weapon, but he didn't. He did something colder. He smiled. By your father, he said to me, Robert Hart. He said you'd never push it this far. Sanchez grabbed Klein's arm. Turn around, hands behind your back. Klein twisted, trying to keep the bag. Sanchez wrenched it free and dropped it on the hood. The zipper split open. Inside, stacks of printed wire templates, a roll of blank cashier's checks, 2 burner phones, and a slim binder labeled in clean black type. Hart Family. Contingency. My stomach dipped, not because I didn't expect a plan, because I saw how detailed it was. I flipped the binder open with shaking fingers. Page 1. A draft motion for renewed emergency guardianship, this time accusing me of violent instability and financial delusion. Page 2. A fake clinical letterhead, pre-filled, my name typed neatly into the diagnosis line. Page 3. Routing instructions for 3 outgoing wires scheduled for 4 p.m. The scholarship fund split into smaller transfers to avoid flags. Sanchez's radio crackled again. Urgent. Unit 3. Court clerk confirms a filing just hit the system. Emergency petition. Signed this morning. Klein leaned against the car, cuffed, breathing hard, but satisfied. You can arrest me, he said, voice low. But if that petition lands before your freeze order, you'll spend months proving you're competent while the money disappears. He lifted his chin at me, eyes bright with spite. And guess what? Maya, your father knows exactly how to make you look crazy on paper. By the time we reached the courthouse, the sun had dipped behind cloud cover, turning the steps a dull gray. Like the building already knew, this was going to be ugly. Helen walked fast, heels clicking like a countdown. They filed the emergency petition an hour ago, she said. If a judge signs even a temporary order, it won't matter what we prove later. It buys them time. Time is how they steal. Inside, the hallway buzzed with that strange courtroom hush. People talking without sound like they're afraid the walls might repeat them. I'd seen it before. The real turning points don't arrive with shouting. They arrive with one quiet question. We turned the corner, and there they were. My father stood outside probate courtroom 4 with his lawyer, already in performance mode, worried brow, open hands. And beside him, like a prop that made the story look official, stood a man in a suit holding a folder stamped Clinical Evaluation. Morin wasn't there. That hit me harder than seeing her would have. My father stepped forward. Maya, please, you're spiraling. You chased Marin to a storage facility. You brought police. You're proving our point. Helen didn't let me speak. She leaned in, voice calm, deadly. Detective Sanchez has the bank manager in custody. We have evidence of forged safe deposit access logs, an expired notary stamp used on a power of attorney, attempted wire transfers to Voss Consulting, and a contingency binder outlining how to weaponize competency filings. My father's lawyer blinked. Your Honor hasn't... The courtroom door opened. Judge Ortega appeared, robe already on, eyes scanning, like she'd been warned this wasn't routine. Her gaze landed on Sanchez first, then on me. Ms. Hart, she said evenly. Again? My father's attorney started. Your Honor, this is an emergency petition. Sanchez stepped forward and held up the binder from Klein's duffel. This is the emergency, he said, and it's criminal. Judge Ortega took the folder without rushing. She flipped pages, wire templates, draft motions, fake letterhead, my name typed into a diagnosis line like it belonged there. My father's mouth tightened. Those aren't mine. Helen slid one final item onto the bench, the small USB drive I'd found in Celeste's kitchen tin. Before you decide who's unstable, Helen said, please watch 30 seconds. The courtroom monitor lit up. Celeste sat at her table, trembling. My father stood behind her, too close, too controlling, while Morin's voice coached the signature. Celeste whispered, I don't want to. And my father leaned down and said something that made her shoulders collapse. The room didn't gasp. It just froze. Judge Ortega paused the video and looked straight at my father. Mr. Hart, she said softly, did you think this court was a stage? My father opened his mouth, and behind him, the man holding the clinical evaluation quietly slid his folder into his briefcase like he suddenly remembered he had somewhere else to be. Judge Ortega didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She set her fingertips on the paused frame of Celeste's video, my father looming behind my aunt's chair, and let the silence do what shouting never could. Mr. Hart, she said again, evenly, did you think this court was a stage? My father swallowed. Your Honor, I was trying to keep peace. Celeste was confused. Morin, stop, Ortega cut in. You're not here to narrate. You're here to answer. Helen stood. Your Honor, we move to deny the petition with prejudice, impose sanctions for bad faith filing, and grant an immediate freeze on all accounts tied to the trust, Voss Consulting, and any affiliated entities. My father's attorney jumped up. Objection! This is a probate. It was a probate, Judge Ortega said. Now, it's evidence. Sanchez stepped forward, placing the Hart family contingency binder on the clerk's table like a brick. We arrested the bank manager, he said. He had wire templates, fake clinical letterhead, and a drafted petition accusing Ms. Hart of violent instability. It was meant to land before your freeze order. Judge Ortega opened the binder and flipped through a few pages. Her expression didn't change, but the courtroom temperature did. Cold doesn't need theatrics. Then she looked at the man with the clinical evaluation folder, still halfway turned toward the exit. Sir, she called, calm as a blade, return to counsel table. The man froze. Slowly, he faced the bench. What is your name? Ortega asked. He cleared his throat. Dr. Brian Keller. License number? A beat too long. Your Honor, I'm a consultant. Helen stepped in like she'd been waiting for that word. May I approach? She didn't wait. She held up a printed page. The letterhead in their binder lists Keller Psychological Services. There is no such entity registered in this state. The man's face drained. Judge Ortega's eyes moved to my father. So you didn't just try to take her autonomy. You tried to manufacture a diagnosis. My father's voice cracked. You don't understand. Morin is the one. Morin is absent, Ortega said. You are present, and you filed this petition. She picked up her pen. Petition denied, with prejudice. Immediate protective order granted. All related accounts are frozen pending investigation. This court is referring the notary fraud, bank collusion, and attempted wire transfers to the district attorney and federal authorities. My father looked at me then, really looked, like he'd been waiting for me to break. I didn't. Ortega leaned forward one last time. Ms. Hart, she said softly, do you have any reason to believe Evidence is still at risk tonight. I thought of the shredded papers on Marin's screen, the missing originals, the after-hours badge. Yes, I said, and I think she's running. Sanchez's radio crackled before anyone could breathe. Detective, airport security just flagged Marin Voss. One-way ticket. Boarding in 12 minutes. Sanchez grabbed his keys, and my father, finally cornered, whispered the first honest sentence I'd heard from him all day. She won't go alone. Airport lights have a special kind of cruelty. They make every face look guilty, even the innocent ones, especially when you're running. Sanchez drove one-handed, radio pressed to his shoulder. Gate B12, dispatch repeated. One-way ticket. Name on the booking, Marin Voss. I stared out the window at the blur of highway signs and thought about how fast a life can be rewritten on paper, a petition, a forged signature, a stamp from a dead commission. And suddenly you're unstable in the public record. We hit the terminal and moved like we belonged there. Sanchez flashed his badge at TSA, and the agent's eyes sharpened instantly. Two officers peeled off to block the jet bridge while Sanchez and I cut through the crowd. I saw Marin before Sanchez did. She'd changed the costume. Baseball cap, dark glasses, hair tucked in, posture small. But her walk was the same, controlled, like she expected the world to step aside. She was already in the boarding line. Sanchez stepped up behind her. Marin Voss. She didn't flinch. She turned slowly, like she'd been called for an upgrade, not an arrest. Detective, she said, voice honey smooth. You're late. Hands where I can see them. Marin smiled and lifted her hands. Empty. I'm cooperating. I'm leaving, that's all. A gate agent blinked, confused. A couple behind Marin leaned away as if trouble had a smell. Sanchez reached for cuffs. Marin leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel private. Before you do that, she whispered, ask her father where he is. My stomach tightened. Sanchez's eyes flicked past her shoulder, scanning the terminal. Then I saw him. Robert Hart stood near a pillar by the coffee kiosk, no suitcase, no jacket, just a man trying to look like he was waiting for someone else. The second our eyes met, he turned, not away, toward the exit. Sanchez barked into his radio. Stop the mail in gray, north doors, now! Marin watched the commotion like she'd planned it. He told me if this went bad, she said calmly, he'd pin everything on me, and you'll let him because he's louder. Sanchez snapped the cuffs on her wrists. You can explain that at the station. Marin didn't resist. She only angled her chin toward me. Open your email, she said. I scheduled a message. If I don't board, it sends. What message? I asked, throat tight. She smiled without warmth. The one that makes you look like the mastermind? Screenshots, a fake confession, a therapy note, your signature again. Sanchez's radio crackled with shouting near the doors, running feet, a security alarm, a brief burst of chaos. Marin exhaled like she'd been waiting for the punchline. So, here's the deal, Maya, she said softly. You can arrest me and spend the next year proving you're sane. Her eyes locked on mine. Or you can play smarter than your father ever expected. Marin sat in the airport's small security office like she was waiting for a car service, not an interrogation. Hands cuffed in front, chin lifted, eyes steady. You can arrest me, she said softly, but my email doesn't care. Sanchez checked his watch. How long? Marin's smile twitched. 17 minutes. My stomach dropped, not from fear, from math. 17 minutes was enough time for a lie to reach every inbox that mattered. "Phone," Sanchez ordered. She shrugged. "It's locked." Sanchez took it anyway, bagged it, then looked at me. "Call Helen." I did. One ring. "Helen," I said, "the smear email is timed. If it lands, it hits my firm, the scholarship board, maybe media." Helen didn't ask questions. "Send me everything right now, preempt it." So I did what my grandmother taught me and what my job trained into muscle memory. I got ahead of the narrative with records. From the airport lobby, I emailed my managing partner, HR. I and our ethics counsel a single package: bank freeze order, the expired notary proof, the attempted wire beneficiary, the contingency binder pages, no drama, just timestamps and documents. Subject line: urgent. Anticipated forged communication/active fraud case. Then I called the scholarship board chair and said, "If you receive anything claiming I confessed, don't respond. Forward it to counsel. It's staged." Back in the security office, Sanchez was on the phone with a judge. Voice clipped and urgent. Marin watched him like she was watching a slow movie she'd already seen. "You're really going to fight a timer?" she asked me. "That's adorable." Sanchez ended the call. "We have an emergency warrant for the device." Marin's composure flickered, one blink too slow. The tech officer used a portable kit, then held the phone up to Marin's face. "Face ID failed the first time." She jerked her head away. Sanchez steadied it. The screen unlocked. A calendar popped up. A scheduled send. 12 recipients. My firm. The scholarship board. A local reporter. Even Daniel. Marin's confession package was attached. Screenshots, a fake therapist note, and a typed statement with my name pasted at the bottom like a signature. Sanchez hit "Cancel send." For half a second, relief warmed my chest. Then a new banner slid down across the top of the screen. Security alert. Password changed. Maya Hart. Primary email. My breath caught. That wasn't Marin's phone. That was mine. I opened my laptop, hands suddenly cold, and tried to log in. Access denied. Marin leaned back in her chair, satisfied again. "I told you," she whispered. "The first email was bait." Sanchez's radio crackled. "Detective, your suspect, Robert Hart, just crossed the state line. Rental car. No destination listed." And I realized what Marin had really bought with those 17 minutes. Time. Not to smear me, to erase me. My laptop kept rejecting me like I was a stranger. Incorrect password. Account recovery unavailable. And in the top corner, like a joke, my name still sat there as if the system couldn't tell the difference between identity and access. Sanchez paced outside the airport office, phone to his ear, barking updates about Robert crossing the state line. Inside, Marin watched me with that calm, predatory patience of someone who knows a timer always favors the liar. "You're locked out," she said softly. "So whatever happens next happens without your voice." I didn't argue, for I opened a blank document and listed facts like it was a ledger. Recovery number changed, backup email unknown, forwarding rules possible, case materials exposed, father running. Then I called Helen. "Assume my primary email is compromised," I said. "I need legal hold notices from a clean address, and I need my firm warned right now, by phone, not email." Helen didn't hesitate. "Done. I'm drafting a sworn statement that your account was hijacked during an active fraud investigation. If anything from you appears, it's presumptively forged. Also," I added, "check for filings. If they can fake my signature, they can fake my consent." Sanchez stepped back in. "We can't chase a ghost," he said. "We need a destination." I closed my eyes and pictured Robert's habits: control, optics, exits. He wouldn't drive randomly. He'd drive to a place where he could finish the paperwork. "Marin," I said, turning to her, "where was he going to meet you?" She smiled. "I don't know." I leaned in, voice low. "Then tell me how he changed my password." For the first time, her eyes flickered, tiny, involuntary. "He didn't," she said. "He didn't need to." And suddenly, it clicked. Someone else had given him the reset code, someone who still believed he was a worried father, someone who would answer the phone. Daniel! My stomach dropped like an elevator cable snapped. Sanchez saw my face shift. "Who?" "My boyfriend," I said, throat tight. "He asked me to just take the evaluation. He thought he was helping. If Robert called him pretending it was for my safety—" Sanchez was already moving. "Get me his number." I dialed Daniel on the burner. 1 ring, 2. He picked up, breathless. "Maya, are you okay? I got a weird call." "What did you give him?" I cut in. Silence. Then Daniel whispered, horrified, "He said you were having an episode. He said you'd asked him to help reset your email. I read him the code." Marin leaned back, satisfied again, like the world had snapped into the shape she wanted. Sanchez grabbed the phone from my hand. "Daniel, listen to me carefully. Where are you right now?" Before Daniel could answer, my burner buzzed with an incoming text from Helen. "New email just went out from your account to the district attorney. Subject, confession." And I realized Marin's first timer hadn't been the real threat. It had been the test run. Helen's text hit like a gut punch. "New email went out from your account to the district attorney. Subject, confession." For half a second, the world narrowed to one thought: they're going to flip the case by flipping me. "Get me the DA's on-call line," Sanchez said, already moving. "Now!" I called Helen back on the burner. "They sent it," I said. "What do we do?" "We preempt," she snapped. "I'm filing a sworn declaration that your email was compromised during an active fraud investigation. I'm calling the DA and the court clerk. You are not speaking to anyone without counsel." Sanchez leaned in. "Put it on speaker." Helen didn't hesitate. "Detective, tell the DA this. Any communication from Maya after 2:11 p.m. is presumed forged. We have the bank manager in custody, the contingency binder, the expired notary proof, and attempted wire transfers to Voss Consulting. If they rely on a confession from a compromised account, they're walking into a trap." Marin sat cuffed on the other side of the airport office, watching us like she was counting down a bomb. "Too late," she murmured. "Once it's in their system, it's poison." Sanchez ignored her and turned to me. "Daniel." My stomach twisted. Sanchez took the burner and put Daniel on speaker. "Tell me exactly what Robert asked for." Daniel's voice shook. "He said Maya was having an episode. He said she asked me to help reset her email. He said it was for safety." "Did he mention where he was?" Sanchez pressed. "Yes," Daniel whispered. "He said he was driving to finish paperwork at a place near the state line. A motel. Pine Crest something." Sanchez's eyes flicked to Marin. Her smile thinned. "He'll file another emergency petition," she said lightly, "this time with your confession attached. He'll say you admitted to manipulation, fraud, delusions. He'll ask for an immediate pickup order. You'll be arrested before you can open your mouth." The room went cold. Sanchez's radio crackled. We traced the confession email's login token IP pings off a motel Wi-Fi, Pinecrest Motor Lodge, rental car transponder matches heading north. Go, Sanchez said. In the cruiser, Helen called back. DA is pausing action pending verification, she said. But Maya, if Robert files that petition first, it creates momentum. Momentum is dangerous. We pulled into the motel lot just as dusk turned the sky metallic. Through the lobby window, I saw him, Robert, standing at the counter with a man in a blazer, holding a portable scanner and a stack of forms. Robert looked up. Our eyes met. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved, like he'd been waiting for the moment he could point and say, "See, she followed me." Then he grabbed the folder and ran for the back exit, and on the top page in bold letters I saw the title that started this whole nightmare in court: Emergency Guardianship Petition. Detective Sanchez caught my father at the back exit just as he shoved the petition folder under his coat and sprinted toward the lot. "Robert Hart, stop!" He didn't. He zigzagged between cars, trying to make the chase look messy, like I was the one spiraling, like the story could still be rewritten if enough strangers watched. I didn't sprint after him. I walked fast, scanning for the real danger, the man with the portable scanner. He was already moving, laptop bag tight to his side, aiming for a dark sedan with out-of-state plates. Sanchez tackled my father before he reached the curb. Robert hit the pavement, and the folder skidded open. Pages flashed across the asphalt, emergency guardianship language, my name, and the forged confession listed as Exhibit A. "You're done," Sanchez said, snapping cuffs on. My father tried to smile through it. "She followed me. She's unstable." "Save it," Sanchez cut in. "You're holding forged filings and attempted wire instructions." The scanner man reached his sedan. I lifted the burner and called Helen. "He's leaving, Lot B." Helen didn't hesitate. "Probable cause is covered. You focus on containing the confession." "My email," I started. "Locked down," she said. "Affidavit filed. Preservation notice sent. Anything from you after the compromise time is presumed forged." A siren chirped near the motel entrance. Sanchez's partner blocked the sedan before it cleared the exit. The driver stepped out, hands up. Dr. Keller, the fake consultant, finally out of excuses. Sanchez came back holding two things: my father's phone and the motel printer tray. From the tray, he lifted a fresh sheet. 3 transfers scheduled for 4 p.m., split to dodge flags. From the phone, he opened a draft titled Confession Final. He looked at me. "Last word?" I nodded once. "Send the truth." Helen wrote one clean sentence: "My account was hijacked during an active fraud investigation. Any confession is forged. Attached are verified records and arrest details." Then she attached the freeze order, the expired notary proof, and the custody report.